Gabrielle Hawkins, but what did she do?
She did work for.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to call the work session for April 20th for the Sierra Vista City Council to order. That's item number one. Item number two is the presentation discussion. First item is the April 2020 council meeting. And of course, we'll start that with the call to order, the roll call, invocation, and the pledge this time by Mr. Benning. We have Mr. Johnson with the acceptance of the agenda. City manager's report. Ms. Yarborough, anything you'd like to highlight on that?
The only thing I wanted to highlight, Mr. Mayor, was to point out that we're scheduling an executive session on May 11th at 1:30 before your next work session. And then I'll have a report on the usual on Thursday night.
Okay, and Mr. Petuchik is on vacation. That's why he's not here today. Okay. Let's see. Public hearings. Start with the just basically a presentation by Mr. McLaughlin on the CDGB. Mr. McLaughlin, would you like to give us a preview?
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of council. The public hearing on Thursday will be followed by a 30-day public comment period on our draft annual action plan for CDBG funding for the 2021 program year. The annual action plan is essentially our funding application to HUD for next year's allocation, which came in at just over $250,000. The proposals contained therein were developed following a widely distributed notice of funding availability, which drew 3 responses from outside agencies. You heard the applicants' presentations on March 11th. At the hearing, there appeared to be a consensus to move forward with constructing the 113-space parking lot at East Sierra Park as a single phase. The initial layout has been revised to conform more closely with the approved master plan for the property. The project will be a continuation of the redevelopment of the site, which started with the demolition of the former Public Works Yards buildings in December of 2019. This will provide an area-wide benefit to a low-income neighborhood that was identified as a target area for CDBG investment. There also appeared to be agreement on funding the Emergency Home Repair and Disability Modification Program at the full amount, $50,000. This supports the housing rehabilitation goal in the city's consolidated plan. We anticipate assisting 7 or more individuals in making needed repairs to owner-occupied structures within the city limits. The draft annual action plan also recommends funding for 2 of the 3 outside agency requests, Good Neighbor Alliance and St. Vincent de Paul. Staff will work with the Public Affairs Office to increase public awareness about fair housing laws in coordination with our public sector partners. You look like you want to ask a question.
Oh,
okay, good. Keep rolling. Okay. All right. The scope of the parking and accessibility improvements at St. Vincent de Paul have been reduced to 6 spaces with a 12-foot drive aisle, for which we are contributing $15,000. The organization has the ability to cover any cost difference above the approved grant amount. In a separate but related effort, we're also working with our city engineers to explore the potential use of FTA grant funding for next fiscal year for making sidewalk improvements along Bartow Drive to fill in the missing segments. We understand that there's a larger rehabilitation project planned for the future, so we're studying and analyzing and making sure that it can be done ahead of that rehabilitation project. We're also recommending approval of the requested amount for the kitchen remodel project at Good Neighbor Alliance. Funds will be used to replace countertops, cabinets, and drawers that are falling apart due to age and heavy use. The project also covers installing a commercial dishwasher and pantry to improve efficiency. The cost of that project is just under $19,000. The proposed projects are consistent with the 5-year consolidated plan. We will incorporate any public feedback that we receive at the hearing and comments from council. And before publishing the final draft for a 30-day comment period, we expect the final version to be presented to you on May 27th before submitting to HUD for their review and approval. And with that, I'll answer any questions.
Questions, Mr. McLaughlin? Yes, ma'am.
Matt, and I'm sorry that I don't see it in the packet right now, but I can't remember how long the Good Neighbor Alliance quote was, because we know construction materials and things have gone drastically up in the last even few weeks.
There was an estimate provided with the application.
Right.
I believe it was a recent estimate.
Okay.
That estimate will have to be updated at the time we're ready to actually perform the project, and we will ask for additional bids.
Okay, so we'll try to keep
So it's
it
not
within
locked
that
into a
scope.
single vendor. We have procurement rules that we need to follow. So
Right.
that's just
Understood.
Yeah, for guiding their funding request to the city.
Okay, so if it were to come in higher because of cost, they would just have to make that difference up, is I guess what I'm asking.
They would have to reduce the scope or make up the difference
Okay.
through outside funding.
That answers. Thank you.
Anything else for Matt? Yes, ma'am.
I know you said the program for the neighborhood stabilization will be carried out through code enforcement funds. There's enough. It's going to be the same amount. We'll have the same amount to dedicate to that.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Humphrey, we are asking for additional funding in next year's budget for code
probably
enforcement.
Okay, and okay. Thank you. I am happy with how you figured out how to make this work, because I think we all wanted to be able to at least help. St. Vincent de Paul. Okay, well, thank you.
Our initial staff recommendation was developed ahead of actually receiving the applications. The closing deadline was the Friday before the council meeting. And in the past, we haven't gotten a great response, quite frankly, from the nonprofit sector. So we were very glad to see very strong proposals brought forward for your consideration. And we certainly believe, as you do, that they're worthy of funding.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. We now move on to new business, and we have the approval of regular city council meeting minutes for April 8th. Any additions, corrections, deletions on the April 8th minutes? Okay, so seeing none, we'll move on to item number 4, and I guess 4 and 5, but 4, Ms. Flassar going to talk to us about the grant for federal aviation from the CARES Act funding.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, in response to COVID-19, the federal government has issued a variety of relief measures known collectively as the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act. As it applies to airports, the CRRSA Act is intended to address operational impacts from COVID-19, primarily increased expenses from heightened sanitation measures. The value of the grant offered to specific airports is derived by a legislative formula which takes into account items such as the airport size and the number of operations. The Sierra Vista Municipal Airport has been offered $13,000. This is the second round of COVID-related funding, which has been offered to the Sierra Vista Municipal Airport. A $30,000 offer was accepted in May 2020. The purpose of the grant is to maintain safe and efficient airport operations. Funds provided under the grant agreement can only be used for purposes directly related to the airport, such as reimbursement of an airport's operational and maintenance expenses or debt service payments. New airport development projects are not eligible under this grant. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Mrs. Flassar? Thank you, Sharon. We go on to the next item, which is another grant from the Federal Aviation Administration for taxiway rehab. And Ms. Flassar, would you please give us your report?
The Federal Aviation Administration operates the Airport Improvement Program to provide funding assistance to airport operators for various capital improvements. Projects are prioritized for funding based on eligibility criteria, which takes into account the project location and overall need. In addition, only projects with a direct general aviation or commercial benefit are eligible for AIP funding. The City of Sierra Vista has identified a need for pavement rehabilitation work on an apron area adjacent to the terminal and on a nearby taxiway. The need for the project was further substantiated by a pavement study performed by the Arizona Department of Transportation, which recorded relatively low pavement condition scores for the apron area in particular. The FAA has accepted the project as eligible for AIP funding and is offering the city a construction grant in the amount of $839,469. The construction grant is 100% federally funded with no required state or local match. The percentage of federal funding differs from typical AIP projects, which are 91% federally funded with a 4.5% match from both the local government and ADOT. However, due to coronavirus relief funds, the FAA is able to provide 100% funding for this project. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Mrs. Lassar? All right, thank you, Sharon. We now go on to item number 6, acceptance of a 20-foot wide sewer easement. And that would be Jeff. I got Mr. McLaughlin on my
I'll do it Thursday.
Oh, you get it Thursday? Okay.
Yeah, I'm kind of the understudy here. The main event's on Thursday, so. Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. During the Dutch Brothers site plan review, it was determined that connection to the sewer line, the main sewer line, required a sewer line extension to the property. And if you look at the map here, you'll be able to see that the existing sewer line ends in front of Subway. And so they're going to extend that line from Subway all the way up through to the Dutch Brothers site plan. It goes actually through the Popeyes site and then to Dutch Brothers. That's the yellow line right there. Since the sewer line will be installed on private property, an easement is required to allow the city to maintain the lines should repairs be necessary in the future. The width of the easement is 20 feet, which is sufficient area should any repairs be necessary. The sewer line and easement are located on both Dutch Brothers and the Plaza Vista Mall properties. Therefore, both entities are granting the sewer easement to the city. Public Works has reviewed the attached easements and found the legal descriptions and map to be accurate. This concludes staff support, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Jeff. Any questions from Mr. McLaughlin? Okay, thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
I guess we'll see Matt for the main round. Okay. As far as the rest of the meeting goes, there's a call to the public, comments, requests of council, and then adjournment. So for today's meeting, we'll go to item B, which is the draft fiscal year 2022-23 strategic plan. Ms. Yarborough, please.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. So let me give you a little bit of background on how we got from the couple days we spent last month to the draft you're looking at here. So when we wrapped up with our consultants, Eric and Nicole, they sent me pretty much the document that you saw when we ended strategic planning. So there were a lot of notes in there. There was a basic outline. So then what I do with this document is go through it and I edit it for clarity and readability while trying to maintain all of the goals and ideas and thoughts that council wanted to see in our plan. So I edit that and we end up with this document, but I'll remind you that it's your document. So what we're here today is to share that draft with you. And then if you get your feedback, if you want to rephrase anything, move anything, have a discussion on anything, this is your first time and not your last time if that should be your decision to keep discussing this draft. So in many strategic plans, you'll see a basic outline on like goals, strategies, objectives, initiatives. Eric and Nicole set this up as kind of a hybrid of those items. So when we start with your plan, they went through the whole process of deciding the categories and then developing a mission statement, which is what you see under the category title. From there, they build the goals, and then below that, the strategies and objectives. So the way ours is set up, our goals build upon obtaining or achieving that mission statement, and then the strategies or objectives come below the goals to achieve the goals, which will then achieve the mission statement. So that is the basics of how this plan is set up. My plan now is to just go through each category and see if you have any feedback, anything you want to discuss or change. So we'll start with responsible stewardship.
You want us to just do it as we go?
You can do it however you want. We can start this way, or
Because then I have a comment.
Go ahead.
Okay. So this is worded differently. It might be achieving the same goal that was put into our draft during the retreat, but I remember I requested it to be worded as like a PCI goal, because when we had that meeting, that the graph was like, here's where we are, here's where we want to be, and it was all in terms of PCI. So does this still achieve? Like,
so
what
let
we're
me
going
explain why this is the one goal that I actually changed from what was in the notes from the strategic plan. And Sharon and I had a long conversation about this, and she is certainly available for any more in-depth questions.
Okay.
But let me go through why this is worded this way. And to do that, Brian, if you can switch us over to the overhead, I've got some slides to share. Okay, so this is going back to the report that Sharon did a couple of years ago on the results of the Pavement Condition Index survey. So this is a visual of how all of our different types of streets in the city ended up. And you can see that most of our streets on the far right side, which is our excellent and very good streets, tend to be our arterials and our minor arterials. Those are our larger streets. And the reason why those are in such good condition relative to the other streets in the community are because we got a lot of grant funding to repair or rebuild those streets. So those are all in really good shape. The ones on the far left in the very poor to poor category are more our neighborhood streets and where we've been focusing a lot of the city's efforts. So the reason why we changed that, Councilmember Humphrey, is because our overall average right now is 64. So if we were going to look at changing that measure on average across all of our streets, it'd be a substantial cost. It's more efficient if we instead look to invest on the worst end of this graphic while maintaining the upper end. It would be a more efficient use of the funds and would most likely result in an overall improvement that's better than just let's move the bar 2% or 5%. So that's why this is what we're recommending instead of just let's move the average as a whole.
So the part that that I'm not tracking is because I recognize this graph. It was part of her presentation. In that presentation, the very to very poor streets were at 6-something%. So when we say we wanna make that fall by 10%, are we saying 10% of the 6%? Because you're focused on the very poor in this one, and it said only 6% of our roads were in that condition at the time.
I don't
know what they're at
recall what
now.
that score was, if Sharon does.
This was in 2018. Just because it doesn't, maybe we just need to word it differently. I understand like backlog control and making sure that we are addressing the worst streets while maintaining the other ones, because it gets expensive if we don't maintain those. But I'm just confused by the way it's worded, the goal.
Can you share what your original goal was?
It was based off the graph.
The original goal was something like increase the PCI to 66, and we had to look at that number.
And also that might have changed because this was based off that analysis in end of 2018, and then in 2019 when you gave the presentation, it said we were at an average 64, but then in 5 years, at the rate we were going, we'd be at 58.
Okay.
But then the mayor and Chuck they were like, we should be at 66 in 5 years. Like we should only be on this trajectory. Yeah. So I said 66, but I don't know where we're at now anymore. And
Sure.
because they only get done every few years.
Well, and I think therein lies part of the challenge when we were looking at how to word this objective. If we only update the PCI rankings every 5 years, we could set a measure of 66, 67, but we would have to have some way of actually measuring that at the end of the 2-year strategic plan period. And it ends up being a bit of a moving target because while you repair some roads, other roads decline in condition, and so it's a bit of a moving target to hit. And so we took the spirit of what we thought was being discussed in terms of, where do we want to focus our energy? Where do we want to focus our money specifically? And when we looked at those marginal, poor, very poor, those are the roads that council gets the phone calls about primarily. Those are the ones that are really starting to fall apart and show severe distress. And by improving those roads, we will help that number go up. Exactly how much it goes up is difficult for me to say because meanwhile the roads on the upper end of the spectrum are aging and they're falling back a little bit. So basically it ended up being more of a subjective analysis of how we met the overall goal.
Maybe I should have, sorry, I just thought of something while you were talking. Maybe I should have said, because the consultant gave us variable budgets, like if you put in this much or if this, so should we be focused on that and then the department decides, implements the plan, we just make sure we're meeting the budget so that the next survey comes out that, yeah, we're doing better, or so we're not guessing as much? I don't know.
Well, and we certainly can do a PCI survey more often than every 5 years. 5 years is what's recommended. We can spend the money and do it. Every 2 years, we could do it to get a benchmark and then move on this to see how much things have changed. And we could certainly budget to do that for next year.
If we wait and do it every 5 years, is it still, the money comes from the SVMPO? But if we budget in between, does SVMPO still pay for it, or?
Well, it's something that we could request. I don't know that we could say for sure in 5 years we'll go to the MPO and they'll pay for it.
Not all pavement money comes from the MPO.
I just know that this study was paid for by them.
The study
It was.
So
Originally.
I'm like,
So you're asking.
so the future ones are being paid for by us. So every time we have one done, we'll
Talking
be
about a
paying
study.
for it. Yes, the
Studies
study.
is what she's talking about.
The radar
Something would
scan
have
that
to be-
gives us
That would
the,
have to be negotiated with the MPO as to how often you do it.
Yep.
And who
If
pays
we
for
wanted
it.
them to pay
If
for
we
it
wanted them to pay for it.
instead of ourselves.
okay.
But here's the trouble I had with this slide, and we had a discussion on Tuesday on Monday about
The weekly meeting.
what actually the wording means, what the 10% and all the other stuff is. And I think what they're saying really is the strategy for roads has got to be twofold. One is what we've got already in probably the top 3 categories, which is fairly decent. It's not the best in the world, but it's fairly decent. It's serviceable. We need to maintain that while we pick up the lower 3 elements
Yeah.
to a certain level, and that's really got to be the goal. Now, is that? And my question was, is that really? It says
Right, is it being
is it
addressed?
10% or is it 5% or is it 6% or how's that going to be? But the ways to explain to me is the goal here is to maintain the arterials and minor arterials. At the same time, they're taking the local streets and the collectors back up, because if you've driven around town and you've been in other cities, our arterials and minor arterials are okay. They're not, I mean, they're not the, the best in the world, but they're okay. And it's our local streets and our minor collectors where we have issues where we're gonna have to spend a whole lot of money to not just surface, but to rebuild, in some cases, streets. So we need to do both of those at the same time. Now, how do you articulate that in a goal was our discussion on Monday, and I'm not sure we really reached a conclusion on that.
And this was our first attempt on that, so we're certainly happy to wordsmith that.
I want to tweak. I want to see if we can do better than.
Well, what I would hope that we do today is if you have specific items on this, and you have an idea or a specific language that would make it clearer for everybody. This is our first read,
Yeah.
okay? So go through and do the first read, listen to the discussions we have, and come up with a draft that makes sense to you, and we can revisit it and make sure it makes sense to everybody else.
Okay. Before we move on, I also don't know if we need. I mean, I'm happy to see it there, but it's also mentioned, I think, on one of the last pages, the complete streets. To explore and analyze a complete streets program, we also put it under another goal, which I don't know which one should have it, but maybe it doesn't belong under this one, because this is more about, or maybe we need them under both. But it seems redundant, right, to have them under both?
Well,
It's under goal number 7.
Well, this is particularly about the feasibility of financial and resources. That's what this is.
this deals
particularly.
specifically with resources, where we're gonna spend the money.
So we need it under both. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think we need to have it under both.
Okay.
I have a question on this first page too.
Okay.
Comment. Goal number 4 seems really vague. Like I'm just not sure what the plan. So effectively plan for and manage water resources. Plan for the future use of effluent and continue to partner with public. It just seems, I don't know, it seems vague.
Well, that's, and I'll address this a little bit. When we talk about planning for future effluent and continue to be a partner, we're basically talking about the 2 projects with the CCRN that we're trying to get funding for. One is pretty much waiting on just funding to be developed, and the other one's going to take a little more time to do, where we have additional recharge locations along the river, which helps enhance the flows, the subsurface flows, and then the surface flows within the San Pedro River. So that's just a continuation of what we're doing. The other thing is it mentions benefiting the conservation area when it should in fact say benefiting the upper San Pedro watershed, because that's really what we're doing. Is we're not doing that. Now we do have partnerships that we're working on with the Post, CCRN, Upper San Pedro Partnership, the BLM, etc., on doing these other things. And part of that, one of the activities on water resources could in fact be working with I'm forgetting the name of the conservation effort, the agriculture Department of Defense and Interior's doing the Repi Challenge as well. So there's a lot of things going on there, and those aren't called out specifically, but that's kind of what we're talking about.
Okay. Do we want to spell it out a little clearer, or we just want to leave it general?
Well, we can certainly list participation in those organizations.
Well, I mean, but
Or those-
some
or
of our
those
goals,
projects.
as far as those projects
Yeah.
go, I mean, those
Yeah.
that's the real goal.
Okay. So maybe we need to have increase in Revi money, the projects for I can't remember the name of the projects, but the money for the project. So we can certainly add those as an A and B as an example of what we're doing.
my thought on that.
Anything else on the responsible stewardship category? All right, economic development and community prosperity.
Okay, I do have one on here. During our retreat, we talked about, I'm not sure who put in there, but the initial thought was to expand the program, the West Sierra Vista Partnership Program. Well, okay.
You talking about 1B?
Oh, yeah, yeah, that one, thank you. And, if we're already tapped out of funds because it's being utilized to its fullest and where it's at, should we be expanding the area to include more if there's still a need in the existing area?
We've had some demonstrated interest from businesses outside the area, and we're on something of a trend of expanding the area each year. So we have for the past 2 years, Matt, expanded the redevelopment area.
CB4.
B4,
Okay.
expand.
Do you have any feeling if we're tapped
Yeah,
out
is that
on
what-
requests?
Expand the redevelopment area.
Yeah,
Right.
and I'm talking about the same thing, sorry.
Yeah, so it's already
You
there.
don't want to expand it. Or do you?
I don't know if we should,
Is-
right now.
But then that's the discussion we need to have to council.
Yeah.
What does expansion mean?
Okay, what does it mean? Like, how
Well,
far
that's
are we
for
going
us-
with
that's-
this?
That's for us to decide and for the council,
Oh,
the staff to recommend to us how far we go.
Well,
But it also talks about the partnership program expanding as well, which is the money.
right, that was the original
That's the
intent,
money,
and now
yeah.
it's the redevelopment area as well, and I'm not sure. Okay, do you have?
Who wants to, Matt, did you want to add something?
Sure.
Let me just start by saying that through the Brownfields grant that the county received, we are going to be working with a consultant on a scope of services to develop a study that will analyze existing conditions within the West End and make a recommendation on areas that should be included within the redevelopment area, as well as a strategy for revitalization that may include a recommendation to increase the amount of the West Sierra Vista Partnership Program. There'll be engagement with business and property owners, which we do currently on a routine basis. As you know, the partnership program is application driven and requires a match in application funds for a project. And so interest levels vary from year to year. It's hard to predict who's currently contemplating a project. They'll be coming forward in the next year. We just want to be prepared
Okay.
with the grant should those opportunities arise. So
Yeah,
we'll
and the
have a
mayor
little bit-
did just point out 2 key words that I was kind of ignoring, as appropriate, which makes me feel like more comfortable. So that sounds good, thank you. I think that's all I had for that one.
All right, anything else on this category?
I would say, just on goal 1C, you talk about, enhance current redevelopment, abatement, and code enforcement efforts. We focus a lot on Friedtown site, and then as was brought up, just this year and has been brought up a few other times, there's other areas of Sierra Vista that need attention. So I think not
Well,
that
maybe-
we're not
maybe-
paying attention to them, but
Maybe the answer to that question is to go to C number 2 and put prioritize efforts and ongoing funding for abatement / code enforcement across the city. Just add those 2 words,
I was
or
just thinking,
citywide,
like,
or
there's-
or something like that.
Yeah,
Does that? But you're right. We can't ignore stuff that's not on the west side. But again, the first bullet really deals, in my mind, with annexation.
Yeah.
yes.
We do have pockets of annexation, primarily north of Fry and west of 7th. But there are other pockets around.
There's other pockets that
around the
could-
community.
Benefit from annexation too, but. And cleanup,
Yep.
not just there.
Okay. And quality of life.
I did want to talk about how we changed the visitor center goal.
Which one is that?
Victoria. It was under goal number 4. Yes. Evaluate future facility needs. I think I liked it better that the goal was specifically about the visitor center and that it had a timeline in it. This seems more open-ended. I don't like that.
Well, I think we got to realize a couple of things when we're talking about identifying future needs. Obviously, visitor center would be one. How are we going to redo? And believe me, I've had a number of talks with the city manager and assistant city manager, as well as some folks in the public. What are we going to do with the Oscar Reroon Community Center and museum? Except you go down the list of how we're going to meet. We got to identify the needs. We got to look at the specific functions that those buildings or those facilities need to be doing in the future, and we need to be smart about how we plan for functions. Some functions can be located where they are now and be okay. Some may need to move. Some may need to be co-located. And to me, when I read that, that's the kind of plan that the staff needs to come up with, so we can build on that. For the next step would be obviously to prioritize which facilities we have money to improve or rebuild or whatever, and then set up a program to go about methodically improving each of those facilities or rebuilding or reconstructing those facilities based on the needed function for the public, and that hasn't gone down. So when I read that, that's what I think.
Councilmember Humphrey, would it help to take the next step, as the mayor suggested, and add a second item under there that said prioritize the needs and plan for future facilities?
Yeah, can I think about
Yeah.
more? I do want to I want to put something more specific on, but maybe as another
I think
next layer.
then you add the gym that needs to be redone and what functions go in the gym.
Gym.
Are we using the little sports building over there effectively that is relatively good shape since we've already rehabbed it once? I mean, all those facilities questions kind of come to mind when in my mind when I read that objective. So there could be a lot of different sub points on that one.
Yeah.
I have a comment too. Well, I love the eyes, the innovate, ignite, that kind of stuff. I really, really loved seeing that. I love that kind of thing. But one of the things in here for 1C, market facilities with intent, I feel like it's missing something. I feel like it's a little bit kind of just a little too bare. And that's one of the things that kind of like stood out to me a little bit.
Okay.
So you talk about market facilities with intent.
Yeah.
So you need to say with the intent of.
Or something, yeah.
So what is the intent there? I'm looking at one of my instigators.
To bring in more tournaments.
Bring in more tournament, to bring in more revenue, to.
Because it's under sports tourism revenue, so it would be marketing facilities with intent to bring in things that generate more revenue. So that's the connection.
So the intent is to attract more tournaments and revenue.
Sporting events.
Sporting events.
Okay.
Okay. But you're right, it was kind of hanging there, wasn't it?
A lot of them are.
I can add some additional wording on to bring in additional revenue just to make the tie more clear, if that would make more sense.
I remember in that conversation, it was about how to increase, and so rather than just blanket marketing the facilities, we mark them with the intent of A, B, or C, whatever it is we're trying to accomplish with that facility, we market for that intent to use. I just remember that being the conversation.
Okay. Anything else before we move on from quality of life? Final
I
category.
just want, can you go back just a little bit? I just want to hit that top bullet there. One of the conversations I have with the city manager is specifically that deals with CCOM. CCOM needs in the future to be its own separate little governing body with its own issues and own personnel and own ability to manufacture and live on its own with of course the advisory board made up of the members, okay? But it's going to take probably 10 years to get to that point. So we still need to help with recruitment and a few other things. I know we're providing the overwatch now while they're trying to hire the next director. So that's going to happen for a while, but eventually CCOM needs to be a standalone organization, just like Fry Fire is separate. The other elements are separate level of government, even though it has a governing board made up of cities, county, and other fire districts, et cetera. So that's got to be on the horizon. But right now, the critical things are make sure it's funded, and we get to recruit the qualified dispatchers. Those are the two biggest issues.
But if the goal is to get,
To get them to be independent.
to get the bird to
The
fly
really
from
goal
the
is to
nest, then,
the goal is to get them to be independent, really. And it's going to take some time, is all I'm trying to say.
is there any steps, like action steps,
They are,
little by little?
the board is doing that.
Okay.
Okay.
That could be
And again, it's a separate government organization, because I kind of have a problem with, this is the city's plan,
Okay.
that we're going to go to the staff and say, staff, produce something. And really, when we have the other agencies, outside agencies coming in there, well, we need to know as the city council, we have less individual control, whether it's a MPO was mentioned earlier, or CCOM, or whatever. Although we do have some input, we don't necessarily have control. So we need to be aware of that when we're establishing goals like this. Thank you. I'll get off my soapbox.
Okay, the final category here is citizen engagement.
And I didn't really have any comments the way this was listed when I talked to the city manager and assistant city manager. And the reason probably is not because I'm completely satisfied with the way we're doing citizen engagement, but the fact that we are doing a lot of things and have done a lot of things in the last 2 years. And really, we need to, in my mind, we need to perfect and continue what we're already doing. And there are some things that we can do to enhance that. And I think this pretty much covers what we want to do to make sure that we have two-way communication with the public.
Okay, I have a number of comments from the mayor and Rachel from our meeting yesterday. A number of notes I've taken today. I'll go back and work on the next draft. I'll reach out to some of you who had specific comments and have a conversation about what you'd like to see. And then I'll send out the next draft, and we'll probably have it on the next meeting agenda to discuss again.
And council, when you look at this, you need to keep in mind not only what was discussed at the meeting, but you realize that this is gonna be guidance that's given out to the staff, and it's gotta be clear enough in the staff's mind what they need to do. They will take this and they will figure out what all the appropriate steps are to get to these levels. And we just need to make sure we're clear enough in our guidance to them as to what we want. And that can be tricky. Believe me, we've done this a few times. Okay?
Thank
Thanks
you,
for the
Mayor.
good discussion, and thank you for the presentation.
Back.
Next, we'll go to the general fund update and overview. And Ms. Jennifer is up.
All right, Mr. Mayor, members of council, while Jen's getting this presentation up and ready, I just wanted to say a couple of things. So this is one of our more difficult budget presentations to put together because we're dealing with revenue projections. We're still working through O&M and personnel and working on balancing the budget, which is the presentation we'll present to you at the next work session in 3 weeks. Most of the numbers that are in here are our best estimates at this time. So we're going to continue refining those numbers. You will most likely see some different numbers when we bring a balanced budget back to you and possibly at our work sessions in June. One thing I wanted to point out though is that this is a good news presentation. Our revenue has been very strong in the past year for many reasons. We just got February's numbers, which we're waiting to see March's numbers. That will give us a clearer picture of how things are coming out of the pandemic. But at the end of February, we were 14.5% over last year's revenue. So while we're still projecting conservative revenues for next year, that's a specific area where you might see a little more upward movement than what we're currently projected. Once we see what March and we'd love to see April's, but that won't be until later in May when those numbers come in. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jen and let her go.
Mayor and members of council, so today we'll go over the general fund revenue highlights and the personnel changes, as well as a brief overview of the requested O&M budget, and then the next steps in the budget process itself. So we'll begin with the general fund. It's the largest fund, comprising approximately 45% of the city's budget. We will not discuss enterprise funds today, but we'll go into them more in the next work session. So the general fund pays for many services that the departments provide, including non-enterprise fund public works sections, such as fleet, facilities, and engineering. So revenue sources that make up the general fund are mostly listed on this slide. That I'll show you now, sorry. But they will be discussed on the further on the following slides. So starting with local revenue, we project about a 4% increase from fiscal year 21's budgeted amount for the local sales tax. This does include the internet sales. And then again, there's a 2-month lag in data, as Victoria said, so we expect to see April's in June. So we can expect this projection to be adjusted for the final budget. So the second item is the property tax levy
Do you have
rate.
any idea whether you expect it to go up or down, or just adjusted? You're not gonna bet?
Mr. Mayor, we'll probably adjust it up.
Okay,
We just really want to see at least the March data.
yeah, gotcha, okay.
So the property tax levy rate is proposed at 0.1108. This means that the property owner will be expected to pay $11.08 per $100,000 for a home. So you see the increase here, and that's mainly due to increased value, not increase for the rate. So the next line is the fees and permits. These are based on actuals from fiscal year 21, and we kept them level. There's a slight decrease in charges for services. We'll go over that in detail in the next slide, so we'll wait on that one. We kept the next 3 categories level with fiscal year 21. So sale of assets are the auction items. Other funds are revenue for transit and MPO, mostly in-kind services. And then all other is a catch-all category that are mainly like public records, fees, CPR classes, and visitor center sales.
Sale of assets, that includes when we have, I'll say, aged police vehicles,
Yes.
okay?
Mayor.
Yes.
And I know we're behind right now on getting new vehicles, although the chief has been very patient. He hasn't harassed me about that. But we got a number, and if we get a number of those a larger number than usual getting through the system where they're turned in or sold, would we see a projection of increase, or you're just not able to predict that?
We didn't include that because we still don't know when the police vehicles will come in.
Okay.
But if we get a better idea in the next month or so, Mayor, we may adjust that.
May adjust it upwards. Okay. All right. Thank you.
And we're not planning on King's Court selling this by then or ever. So it's not included. Okay.
Oh.
Just forever.
David?
King's Court is put in the capital improvements fund.
Yeah.
The sale will be in the capital improvements fund, so it's purchased.
Not the
and
general
we have
fund.
the other
Oh, it
activities.
gets-
So King's Court is not included in general fund.
Okay, thank
There
you.
will be a placeholder in the budget for it in case it does sell the same as the last 2 years.
Okay, thanks.
So next are the charges for services. As you see from the previous slide, we project a slight decrease of 51,000 overall. A breakdown of what is included in each area is provided below. But briefly, for the general government, this reflects actuals from fiscal year 21 as printing and duplicating has decreased. The public safety, the decrease is mainly from ambulance revenue. And community development, this decrease is based off actuals again. Planning review has decreased a little bit. Public works was kept level with fiscal year 21, and leisure and library has been difficult to project. So last year we had adjusted it down to the fiscal year 20 actuals due to COVID. So for fiscal year 22, we're going to keep it level as 21 as we see how things go for the year.
And I would suggest to you, Ms. City Manager, when we talk about general government, because of COVID, we didn't do some things that we would normally do in the areas of printing, duplicating, and leases. In public safety, we're probably right about there, but in community development, we didn't have a lot of extra new plans coming in over the prior year. I would assume that we'd have a little bit more activity in community development. Am I off base? Yeah.
Mayor and members of council, Matt and I have had a discussion about that, and Matt has a different take on it than prior directors have. We include building permits under the permits and fees, license and permits, building permits, animal control permits and licenses, and business licenses. Matt's take is a site plan is a permit, not a charge for service, obviously like a building permit. So we're going to be looking at retitling it from just building permits to community development permits or something similar to that. That is where they're currently recording the revenue, and so that's where we're going to make the adjustments. Realistically, under this category, it is the abatements that have been put in there this last year, and then there's a requirement for that vacant home registration that we put in place. Those are the two main revenues, or the two only revenue sources that really are charges for service.
Okay, so the
Community
revenue
development
source has
going forward.
changed, and that's one of the reasons
Yeah,
why
that's
the drop.
one of the reasons you see the
Okay,
change
I
is
got
they're
you.
including more of those as actual permits, because you have a permit to process a site plan, do the site plan work and that type
Got
of
it.
thing, so.
Intergovernmental revenue is all the state shared revenue numbers. Sales tax is increased based on the league's estimate. We believe there's going to be a decrease in the income tax, and that's from the delay in the tax filing in 2019, since there's a 2-year lag on that one. Vehicle licensing tax is based off of actuals, so there'll be a slight increase. In the grants line, the fiscal year 21 budget includes the CARES Act funding. Fiscal year 21 includes CARES Act. Fiscal year 22 will increase as we receive more information about the American Recovery Plan Act. And the local government payments are the 4 ambulance contracts, which we've kept level with fiscal year 21. So overall, you see an increase in intergovernmental revenues.
Jen, since we have, one new council member here and it's good for us to be refreshed, can you just talk about the income tax process and why it's 2 years behind, how that works?
I would love to answer that.
Yes, David can answer it
David can
too.
answer it.
Speak English, David.
Mayor, members of council, income tax is a 2-year lag. They will take the actual 2019 numbers and divvy them out in 2022. That has always been the case. And that's the one number that is a pretty good number that we get from the league. Most of the other numbers are obviously guesstimates on next year, but that is the actual number delayed 2 years. The reason for the decrease is, as you may remember, last year due to COVID, the IRS and the state delayed the tax filing from April 15th to July 15th. Those people who owe money, of course, don't want to pay it too early, so they paid in July. So as we mentioned last year during the budget process in the COVID situation, we expected this decrease. It has come. This current year, they've only delayed it till May, so there'll be taxes this year. So in 2023, we should be back on track. In fact, next fiscal year, we should have some extra because of all the people that delayed their payments from 19 to fiscal year 20, basically, for us. We should have a bump next year on this revenue.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, members of council, I'm going to take over for the next couple slides here. So our class and comp plan and market shift for next year. So what we're proposing is doing our annual 2% step increase, but also moving the range 4% for next year. And here's why. So our market is something that we've discussed quite a lot in the past few budget years, especially with the minimum wage increase that had happened. And so 2 years ago, council approved doing the 2% step increase plus the 2% market shift to adjust for how the Arizona minimum wage was increasing. So we held last year, even though we talked about doing that for 2 years ago and last year. But after the pandemic hit and the projections were extremely bleak for the whole state and especially the city, we decided not to implement the additional market shift last year as well. And so we only did the 2% step increase last year. What we found was that far more cities gave raises last year than we expected and more significant raises than we expected. And so the HR division did a market study over the past spring and fall and found that on average, our salaries have fallen to about 95% of market. Some in many cases worse than that, some not so much, but on average we're at about 95% right now. And what we've seen is that has significantly impacted our ability to hire almost across the board. We simply cannot compete with the salaries in other areas, even when adjusted for our locality. Salary in Gilbert or Glendale or Phoenix isn't going to compare to Sierra Vista, but as far as the market goes and being adjusted for our location, they still just don't compare. And so the 2% step increase and the 4% would make up the 2% that we did not do last year and do an additional shift. We may need to do this next year as well. This would only keep us at about 95% of the market again. So the interesting thing about that increase is the total amount of the increase is about $935,000 across the board. For comparison, last year when we just did the 2% increase, it was a total impact of just over $1.5 million. And the reason for that is we've had a significant number of pretty high dollar retirements in the past year. So even though we're proposing the 2% step plus the 4% market, it would still be almost $600,000 less than just the 2% last year. So in personnel requests for next year, we're recommending a Leisure and Library Services Management Analyst. They are one of the few departments that does not have a management analyst. That person would be doing things like grant management, seeking and applying and managing grants, handling their budget, doing things like revenue and program analysis, more of a business analyst almost for that department, especially with their revenue generation. A street maintenance worker. With the lack of DOC inmate labor in the past year, Sharon and her team have calculated that they've lost approximately 20,000 hours of labor by not having those inmates, and so we need to make up for that a little bit. And it's an area too that should we find if the DOCs come back and we don't need that person anymore, there's generally turnover in that area. We could hold a position in a future year if one became open. The 2 EMS transport staff would be for the new substation. We hired 1 last year, and this would be 2 for when the building is complete in the spring. And then I apologize, we did leave one position off, an engineer for Public Works. Similar in a way to street maintenance, we have a retirement coming up in the not too distant future, so this would be a bit of an overfill as the budget and revenue has gotten better. We've had more projects coming through engineering. By hiring somebody this year, it not only takes some of that load off, but we're able to get a person trained up and then evaluate when that person does retire in another year to see if we need an additional one, or we just hold that position open when that person retires. And then one reclassification this year, the HR division evaluated Brian Driscoll's position and are recommending that his position be upgraded to a marketing production designer. Brian is our person in the back room running all of our video equipment, and so they did take a look at his job description and recommend that he is currently working beyond his current job description.
Before you go on, I want to ask the fire chief a question. Manning for the new station, 4, 6, who's on, how many shifts, how many people on a shift?
Thank you, sir. Mayor Mueller, members of council. It'll be 2 daily for 24 hours.
Okay. And so they would, 2 daily, so you got 2, and then next 24 hours 2, and then they come back on?
Yeah, Mayor Mueller, members of council, we rotate all of our EMS folks from the Fort Huachuca ambulance to the downtown ambulances to give them all experience in all sites, and they will be rotating, yes.
Okay. And you talking 2 apparatus there as well, or just 1?
Initially, just 1 ambulance.
Okay.
Do
Thank you.
Or do we have those people, or they're going to be in this budget, or is that
That's
next
2 of the
budget?
2 of the people. We
Oh,
got
you
some of
just
the people,
have
we're gonna
2.
get 2 more.
Okay,
After the substation's complete.
okay.
We gotta hire and train them though.
That's the hurdle.
Right? Like to have them hired and trained?
Yes.
When you get them.
Helpful.
Thank you.
Okay, and then good news in our PSPRS situation for next year. So both our police contribution rate and our fire contribution rate are decreasing for next year. So the police rate of contribution is decreasing just over 3%, and the fire rate is decreasing almost 3.5%. So that means that the efforts the city has taken to help pay down our unfunded liability are showing a positive effect. And so the final bullet there, I want to explain a little bit about what council's policy is on paying down our unfunded liability and what that means. So even though the rate is decreasing for next year, we're going to continue paying at the higher rate and count that as an additional payment. And so that is about $225,000, which is a good additional payment. In addition to that item, the city also budgets and pays the full amount for all budgeted staff. So that is all vacant positions and people who are in the drop. And so we make those additional payments even though we don't have to. So we are also paying additional money in that way. And then finally, we make the payment at the beginning of the year as soon as possible. So then it's like it sits in an account for us, and any interest that the money makes is also applied at the end of the year as an additional payment. So we've been doing that for a couple of years now, and very good news, that's something that we're finally seeing a result on. And so the total contribution for next year would be just over $5.5 million. And in comparison, the ASRS rate is increasing slightly, about 0.16% next year, and the long-term disability rate is also going up just 1/100%. And so the total contribution is just over 1.6 million.
And I think it's also important to note that normally they would be, the assessment would be a quarterly assessment, and by paying it all of the first of the year, we do in fact gain additional revenue into our account from the interest.
We do, Mr. Mayor.
So,
Okay, thank you. I'll turn it back over to Jen.
Mayor and members of council, so this is the requested O&M as of now. We're still working with all the departments and going through all the requests. We expect to see this number to change for the balanced budget. Keep in mind the allocations out are not included in this number. The allocations to the enterprise fund are calculated at a later time.
So what that means for us is that $10 million, because it will go up in the future or down in the future, because we take in consideration the allocations that are included in the other funds.
Should go down.
Should go down, okay? Okay.
So what we're doing in the next process is to meet with the departments and work on their O&M budgets, finish the personnel numbers and revenue projections. So we'll also be working on balancing the enterprise and all the other funds. So in 3 weeks, we'll come back to you with a balanced budget and then the tentative book to follow. So as you can see, we have plenty of upcoming budget meetings in the future. May 11th, we'll present the balanced budget. You should have the tentative budget book May 28th, and then from June 7th through 9th, we'll do one-on-one council member meetings with the budget work sessions from June 14th to the 16th. You'll vote on the tentative budget June 24th, and then the final budget vote on July 22nd with the property tax hearing, and then the property tax vote August 12th. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Good job staying on schedule. So far, yeah.
Any comments or questions?
Just comment is I like the more detailed in this presentation, especially every year. It's good for us to refresh as existing council, but having new council, it's really nice to have that. So thank you guys for doing that.
And that's one thing I want to mention too. I know we only have one of our newer council members here, but if you do have questions about how this process, the assistant city manager, David and Jennifer are all available to deal with specific questions that you may have or think about later. Because that's the way I was the first year. It was kind of came by hard and fast, and I ended up having questions afterwards.
Yep.
Before we did the vote. So that's going to happen. So please make use of staff. Okay. Anything else for Jennifer? Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Great job. Okay, we're now on to council executive report, and you're gonna deal for the city manager on this one. Any questions on the city manager's report, executive report? Everybody jump at once.
Hey, everyone. You want me to start?
Hey, have we been able to stop you before?
Nope.
Okay.
No, you haven't. This is my favorite time of year. No, just kidding. I love the executive report. So one thing, let's see. Page. Where is it? Page 7. The depression anxiety workshops that were held benefiting, it doesn't tell us how many people were benefited by those workshops.
You talking about the CDGB CARES Act funding?
CARES Act funding, depression, anxiety, it was cut off. Do you know?
Yeah, I should have wrapped the text in that cell. I apologize. I'm
that's
going to have
okay.
to look up that report from the United Way Fund.
We'll fix it and update the
Were they
file.
virtual or in person? That was, I guess, my question.
They were virtual.
Okay.
And there were, I believe, 80 people. Is
Okay,
top of head recollection, but
that's fine.
I'll get you the precise
That's
number.
fine, that's
Okay.
fine enough. Yeah, I was just curious. Because I was wondering how successful, like, an in-person workshop would be right now. And did we originally say that we were doing, like, gift cards to teachers with CARES Act funding?
I don't recall anything about gift cards to teachers as part of the CDBG CARES Act. I'm not aware of any. Are you, Matt?
It's in the list of
it's-
expenses.
As K through 12 educational assistants and the United Way proposal that was presented last November.
Oh, it was in there. 'Cause we talked a lot about food assistance, rental, utility, etc. We talked about mental health, and I mean, it just seems like we're now like throwing, you know.
And that was for school supplies.
Yeah, but start just spreading it thin, you know, where you could concentrate it where it's needed. It's just my only thought there. Yeah, I just didn't know if we had discussed that when we first started. I didn't remember.
They had a pretty narrow scope they had to abide by, and I think that was, I remember I asked that question when the report came out. I think it was there.
We have a subrecipient contract with United Way that laid out the budget in accordance with the presentation they gave to council.
Okay.
And that was one of the line items. If there's some concern about that, there may be some unused funds that we can reallocate to another priority that you deem to be more important. But it was very much appreciated by the teachers to have that additional assistance.
And then just a curiosity kills the cat question. What's the civil airport on a permitted project? Civil airport? Question? Remember? Coronado Drive?
Improvement at the airport.
That's actually this address is City Hall.
Yeah.
Huh?
That's actually City Hall's address.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so what, like a civil airport at City Hall?
It must have been a hangar improvement.
At City Hall?
You were? There was a building permit pulled for a tenant improvement at the airport.
At City Hall?
Well, it's.
Okay, well, we're the
it's-
owners, so.
We're the
Oh,
owners.
we're the
Yeah, it'd be our
owners.
address,
Oh,
so-
okay. I was just like, what
Yeah.
in the what?
Yeah, we had to pull the permit for our
So
own
we
building.
pulled the permit, but we put our building?
Well, we're the owner.
Where the owner is.
But it says project address. I guess that's why it's confusing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can get
To
you
get some more
details.
details on that.
Sure.
I was just curious.
Okay.
Okay.
It's like civil airport on, okay.
You didn't know about the helipad upstairs?
No, I was like, what are we adding to the
Taking it to the
building?
roof.
What's
I get to
going
work every day.
on?
We use
Getting
it every
fancy
day.
over here.
You need
Man,
a key to the elevator.
Honored and everything.
I know. What was I gonna ask? I don't have very much today. You guys are like just reading
It's okay,
through.
I don't either.
I'm excited about the Dyla story. Want to put little notes in food bags because our population doesn't have internet. So that would be the kids to get that information to. Well, side note. And really excited about new playground at Bella Vista Park. That was needed for a really long time. I'm wondering, can we see, is there a copy of the completed plans for the Fry North Garden project available?
Yes, they're
Online?
currently on the procurement website, but we can put a copy of those in the reading room for ease of access.
Okay.
Can you include the redesign for that one that Judy and her staff? I want to see what it's actually going to look like.
What redesign or what?
I went on the procurement site and looked at the design.
For what?
And there's this one structure.
tower.
It's like it has west end. I don't know. Like, how do you?
There's a design that's in the concrete at the intersection of Fry and North Garden, and then there's a decorative feature with a design on top.
Yeah.
It's really it looks really nice, but at the top was this wacky.
Well, the question is, in my mind, is why are we spending money on that? But that's another point of discussion before we get bids back.
Yeah, we'll have to, because I love it, except for the top, which I heard they changed, and I want to see the change. But
Well, I don't remember seeing that in the public
Does it,
meetings. That's my problem.
does
You're
it
right, we
include the
should've-
Fab
right.
Avenue property in it?
Improvements in the
Yeah.
Fab Avenue
Improvements
property?
No,
to
it
it.
won't. It's
Because I
yeah.
thought we were gonna
the
include, well, I know, but I thought we were gonna include at least like the water basin in the project.
I don't know. Did it get added, Sharon?
No, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Pacheco, so there's currently
We can wait another
a
6
study
months.
ongoing for
I don't
what's
wanna
needed.
Wait another 6 months.
I don't want to wait another 6 months.
I don't wanna wait another 6 months, but I'm just like, I'm curious. That's all. Excited, not happy that the carpet had to be ripped out in the police department. But I think that polished concrete is way better. Don't you think? I mean, are they not, they don't like it?
No, that's what we want
Okay.
in there, but
I
it's-
like polished
but-
concrete. I wish I had polished concrete in my house. But no. Sorry that you guys lost all your carpet. And had to have all your carpet ripped out.
It's just in the admin area, just in my offices and stuff.
Just in your office. So, anyways, thanks for sharing that story. And does anyone else have comments? I'm just the only one.
I do
talking.
have a
Go
question
ahead.
for Lara.
Go ahead.
So now that the Summit Challenge is back on and the the Spirits Festival, Wine, Beer, and Spirits Festival, because I was one of them, and then I had a couple people ask, since we had tickets for like the Summit Challenge, and we just never, it got canceled, but we didn't ask for refunds. I was like, just carry it over. Who do they reach out to find out if they have a ticket still for this year that carried over?
They should call the sports department at 515-4999, and they can talk to Paris or John, or they can call the community center as well, and we'll
They'll
track
be able to
down.
look it up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else? Anything else on the report? All right, thank you very much. We now go on to report on recent trips, meetings, and future meetings. I sat in on a phone call with a couple of board mayors I think it was last Thursday, and it was instigated by the mayor of Yuma, and the conclusion of the discussion about what's going on the border with the change with the Biden administration was discussed, and the mayor of Yuma is getting ready to put a letter together for signatures by all the mayors, basically stating a number of problems that were not getting resolved from the federal government. We'll share that, of course, with the governor as well as our congressional delegation, and probably send it to Mr. Biden as well. But we're relatively unscathed here. But Douglas, Yuma, Nogales, and other much smaller cities are having issues that for some reason the federal government thought the local communities could take care of the issues that was going to be the result of the mass migration from South America. So I'm still waiting for that letter. And I hope it's articulate enough to describe the problems. We can get mayors across this at least the southern end of the state to address that. But that's really the only meetings that I've been to, and that was, of course, on Zoom. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Parks and Rec's are meeting tonight, the commission, and we are voting on, finally, the Parks Master Plan to be submitted to the council, so we'll be adding that to hopefully a future discussion next month, and get that presented to all of council to see all the work Parks and Rec and Laura's been doing, so I'm excited about that and giving you all a heads up. And if you want to come tonight, 5:30, Oscar, you're in.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Or you could go to Arts and Humanities Commission tonight, just
It ain't
at
as
the
fun.
library. it's plenty fun, and I'm really glad we're meeting in person again starting tonight.
Yes, I am too.
And the West End Commission met, was that last week? I went to that, but we're starting to meet in person again. It's really nice. But
You made me think of something, if I may.
Go ahead.
There's interest. People have been reaching out to me for the Cultural Diversity Commission.
Good.
So I just want to put out, and hopefully people watching, if you're interested,
Get some applications
send
in.
us some emails and get us some applications, because we'd love to get that started back up.
Okay. Next is the future discussion items or council requests. Victoria, have you got anything that's been asked for?
Just the Parks Master Plan, Mr. Mayor,
Okay.
and your next budget work sessions.
Oh, and the public art on the West End. That's in the design. We gotta talk about that.
Yeah, but that'll be,
Future request.
yeah, that'll be a future request. Public art is separate, should be separate from the road developments, but that's something we'll figure out. Okay. Anything else? See nothing else before the council? Meeting's adjourned.